God. What are you? Where have you come from?
Zog.
Zog? Planet Zog? No, don't tell me. The next thing you're going to say is take me to your leader.
Not really. What I need is Planet Zog rescue services.
What happened?
Second-hand saucer mate. Nowhere to get my path and hazard illuminators tested.
What? No testing stations on Planet Zog? What's the universe coming to? Seriously though, here on Earth, and more specifically in Britain, lamps and reflectors are a key part of the MOT test. Now, that may sound simple, but in fact there are a few things that all good testers should know about what my alien friend here calls path and hazard illuminators. Well, here we are, back in reality, and what we need is a testing station. And to go with that, an expert from the Vehicle Inspectorate. And who better than VI technical trainer Don Hall? How
nice to meet you, Pedro.
Now, what are we talking about today? Surely not all the legal requirements for lamps.
No, not all the legal requirements. We're just going to concern ourselves with what's in the manual.
Is there a difference?
Yes, there is. For instance, a number plate light, the legal requirements say that it should be white, but the manual doesn't actually specify a colour. So in cases like that, the tester can only pass and advise.
For the purpose of the test, what lamps need to be fitted?
Well, if a vehicle doesn't have any front or rear position lamps, there isn't a requirement to fit any other lamps. If it has got those lamps fitted and they've been masked over or painted, then there's no requirement to fit any other lamp.
Well, let's start then with the position lamps, or side lamps, as laymen often call them.
Yes, we need front position lamps. They're there to indicate the presence and width of the vehicle. And starting with the front position lights, they should be white. You need obviously two. They can be incorporated in headlights as well. We will accept, therefore, yellow side position lights, but only if they're incorporated in the yellow headlights. If they're outside the headlights, then they must be white. A tester may find other lamps that look like position lamps on the front of a vehicle, and the manual refers to these as optional lamps. If there's a fault with those, the tester can only advise, because they're not part of the test.
Now, you need an assistant to help with the test, don't you?
Yes, in fact, you can't do a test without an assistant. Your arms aren't long enough to reach all the switches.
Well, we have John here, waiting for you. Your wish is his command.
Right. Well, it's important that you do the test in sequence, so you can identify the lights as they come on in turn. So, John, side lights on, please. With the side light coming on, you can then identify the position, identify the colour, and obviously we've got two. Something else you need to look for is the completeness of the light. Is it performing its function? And these two clearly are. Once you've done that, you can then go in a little bit closer and you give it a little tap, and that's to ensure that the element isn't flickering and going off. It also can check the security and make sure the light isn't likely to fall out. A tester may actually, in close, see some damage as well. And he can actually accept damage, providing it doesn't affect the function of the lamp. So we look at light output, security, durability of any repair.
OK, Don, that's the position lamps done. What are we going to move on to next?
Let's move on to the directional indicators. After 1936, indicators must be fitted. Before 1936, if they are fitted, then testers should test them.
Now, should the indicators flash at any particular rate?
Yes, the manual specifies 60 to 120 times per minute. That's about 1 a second or 2 a second, anything within that range. If the battery's a little bit flat, the tester may have to start and have the engine running, otherwise the flash rate may alter.
And what about colour? Do they have to be amber?
Yes, they have to be amber, but up to the 1st of September 1965, they could be white at the front, so they could be part of the position lamps, and on the back they could be part of the tail lamps. After 1965, then they must be amber.
Well, I suppose you're far more likely to see cars pre-1965 than you are from the 30s. But what about those very old cars that don't have lights at all, but have the old semaphore arms and not lights?
Old arms
yeah.
that come up and down. Well, they still can be fitted and still be used. The things to look for on them is, again, they must be amber, and the arms mustn't stick and they must alight. They don't have to flash, though.
Now, what about the repeaters on the side?
Now, 1986, 1st of April. After that, they must be fitted or have wrap-around front indicators. It's the same date for hazard warning lamps. For pre-86 vehicles, if side repeaters or hazards are fitted, they become testable items.
Well, that's the theory behind the indicator test. Let's put that into action, and we need to get John to switch the ignition on, please.
Right, John, right-hand indicator, please. That's fine. Left-hand indicator. And computer hazards on, please. And the ignition off. Thank you, John. All lights off.
Great. Indicators all present and correct. Let's then talk about the main lamps of the car, the headlights. What should we be looking out for there?
The date, remember, is 1931 with headlights. After 1931, we must have a matched pair.
What's a matched pair?
A matched pair, yes. They must be the same size, the same shape, the same light output, and they must be symmetrical in other. So that's what we mean by a matched pair. The colour of headlamps is not a failable item unless one differs from the other. So for the purpose of the test, a matched pair can be any colour, providing they perform their function.
Do all vehicles require two lamps, or are there some exceptions?
There is one exception, that's a three-wheeler, a Class 3 vehicle. Before 1972, a vehicle can have one. After 1972, a vehicle weight and size come into it. 400 kilograms unladen weight, if it's above that, it needs two. If it's below that, it only needs one. Width also comes in as well. 1,300 millimetres. If it's any wider than that, it would need two. Anything below that, and it only requires one.
OK, well, let's test out the headlamps, and I guess we need to get John to turn on the ignition, please.
Right, the first thing we need on is the main beam, please, John. With the main beam headlights on, we'll go in there, give the main beam a little tap, both sides, to make sure they doesn't flicker and go off. It's important here as well that we have one switch that puts off all the main beam and just leaves a matched pair of dipped headlights on. Can you dip, please, John? With the dipped beam selected now, we go in again, give them a tap to make sure that it doesn't flicker and go off. While we're in close, we can also check the security of the headlight to make sure it's not going to fall out. And while we're in close, we're looking for any damage. The sorts of damage that a tester may come across is perhaps a crack or a hole. Damaged headlamps don't always fail. For a vehicle to fail, the damage must affect the light output or the beam pattern when you come to check the aim. You should also consider whether the vehicle might fail for sharp edges caused by the damage, under section 6.5 of the manual. Right, so that concludes the front lights. All lights off, please, John.
Excellent. Let's go and take a look at the back of the car. Well, Don, there are lots of lights at the back here. In fact, there are even a couple hidden away under here. Are they part of the test as well?
Yes, these are number plate lights. John, can you put your tail lights on, please? With the tail lights on, it's important the number plate also lights up. Any lamp or bulb that's lighting up the number plate would then come into the test. Another issue here is the lights have to light up the number plate. If somebody was to move their number plate up and put it in the back window, for instance, then it wouldn't have any number plate lights, and therefore the tester would fail.
What should you do about reverse lights that become stuck permanently on?
Well, here you won't find reversing lights in the manual, so all the tester can really do here is advise.
Now, fog lamps always cause confusion, don't they? Some cars have one, others have two. What's the situation regarding fog lamps?
Yes. John, can you put the fog lamps on, please? Fog lights. Thank you. Now, this vehicle only has one. There's a date to remember here, 1980, 1st of April 1980, where if there's one's fitted, as long as it's fitted from the centre to the offside of the vehicle, that's fine. If it has two, then we only test the one on the offside.
What about front fog lamps? Are they part of the test?
And you won't find front fog lamps in the manual, and so, no, that would just be advised if there was something wrong with those.
So what about the position lamps at the rear of the car?
Position lamps, they're there to indicate the presence and width at the back of the vehicle. We needed two, and they need to be red. Other issues with rear position lights is you can have indicators incorporated in the two. After 1965, they must be separate. Before that date, they can be combined with the tail lights.
Now, what are we going to check with the stop lamps?
We've got 1936 again. Before that date, there is no requirement, but there's also a clause in the manual that says if they are fitted, they must be tested. Between 1936 and 1971, there must be one, and the one can be fitted to the centre or offside of the vehicle, anywhere across there. After 1971, the vehicle must have two. And where we have two, we then need to worry about the position, not the precise position, but make sure they're about the same height and the same distance inboard.
Now, some new cars I've seen have got lots of stop lamps. They've even got them at the top of the rear window. How do you treat those?
Well, to be honest, they can have as many stop lights as they like. The rule is if we recognise it as a stop light, then we must test it. So, John, can you put your foot on the brake, please? Whichever lights light up when we put our foot on the brake, or our assistant puts the foot on the brake, we then bring those into the test, so they can have as many lights as they like. If one or more LEDs are not working, but we can still recognise an illuminating stop lamp, then that is acceptable.
I've seen some American cars which combine stop lamps and indicators.
Yes, we've got the date again, 1965, where an indicator can be incorporated in the stop lamp. After that date, then it would be a fail, because now we'd come into the realms of any other light adversely affecting the operation of another light.
Now, what if an extra high-level stop lamp isn't working?
That would be a fail, unless it's been disconnected. If it's been disconnected, you then have to identify it's been disconnected. If there's any doubt, then the benefit of that doubt should be given to the customer, and passed and advised is the correct course of action.
Now, I can see there are some reflectors here as part of this line of lights on the back of the car. Are they part of the test as well?
Yes, reflectors, we need the two. They need to be red, and they need to be correctly positioned. The precise position we're not worried about, as long as it's the same height and the same distance inboard. We don't accept reflecting tape. It must be a proper light reflector. And then we look at the damage of the light. But it's not just damage, it's completeness. Is the light still performing its function?
For example, if a lens were damaged in an area that doesn't illuminate, then that wouldn't affect the function of the lamp. Make sure that the damage does not result in the wrong colour light being emitted. Again, remember to consider whether there are sharp edges that might fail under section 6.5 of the manual.
We can accept some repairs, but we're looking for the light output, security and durability of that repair. It would then be the tester's discretion to say, is that light still performing its function?
Well, that's the theory. Let's put the test in action.
Right. Excuse me. John, side lights on, please. Once the side lights come on, then we're going to give them a little tap and check the security on both sides. Rear fog, please, John. Again, once the light comes on, little tap because it's going to be on permanently. Check for security condition of the lens, the reflected area. We can do several things next. Let's do left-hand indicator, please, John. And there we're identifying it as with an amber light flashing between 60 and 120 times per minute. Other side, please, John. Again, making sure it is amber and flashing in the correct sequence. We want other lights on now, so we'd say brake lights, please, John. Off. On. Just to clarify, we have actually got them on. And we can put the hazards on as well. And then we can see if any light adversely affects the operation of obligatory lights. Good practice would be also perhaps put the reversing lights on as well. So if you'd like to put it in reverse, please. The reflectors, just in case we have to identify the reflectors to make sure they're the same height and the same position, and we have two, and they must face squarely to the rear. Thank you very much, John. All lights off, please. That basically concludes our rear lights.
Great. Well, we've got to kick John out of his seat now because we've got to go and sit inside the car for the next part of the test. So, Don, what should we be looking for here inside the car?
Well, there's quite a few things to look at inside the car. We're just mainly going to concentrate on the lighting switches. We have the security and positive action of all the lighting switches. We also have hazard warning lights, rear fog warning lights. We also have some telltales as well. and we need direct to indicate right, to indicate left. We also have hazard telltale as well. That should be checked with both the ignition on and off, and you can see it also lights the panel lights as well. That's perfectly acceptable. So if that didn't work, then the panel lights would be acceptable. We also have a rear fog telltale, and sometimes this is quite dim and you have to look quite carefully to make sure it is actually on. And switching all the light switches off, that basically is all we check on the lighting switches.
There is a telltale, isn't there, for full beam?
Yes, there is. A blue light comes on for main beam, but that isn't part of the test.
But worth checking anyway.
It's worth checking anyway.
OK, let's get out of the car then for the final part of the test. Here we have the beam tester. How does it work?
There's various setting ups we've got to do, and the first thing we must do is have an assistant sat in the driver's seat.
OK, let's get John back into the driver's seat, if you please.
Right, the first setup we need to do, using your user manual instructions, you should identify the distance between the centre of the headlight and the headlight aim tester itself. Test stations have marks on the floor to guide them. The next setting is we must make sure that the headlamp aim tester is lined up longitudinally with the vehicle itself.
It's important to make sure that the beam tester is parallel to the centre line of the vehicle, so that you can assess properly whether the headlamp aims too far to the right or left.
The next part to line up is the centre of the headlight. Whichever your user manual says, then that's what you should obviously follow. So that's the setting up of the machine. The next thing to consider is what type of headlight we're actually dealing with.
There are 3 basic types of headlamp, the European type and 2 British American types. The European can be any shape and may have an E number with a C above it, and often has a segment-shaped pattern moulded into the lens. The beam pattern should have this shape. The 2 British American types are round. If the lens is marked with a number 2, it's the type that should be checked on dip beam and will have this pattern. This one is rather uncommon nowadays and was often used in a 4 headlamp system. The other British American type may have a figure 1 on the lens and is checked on main beam.
Once you identify as a European headlight, they must be checked on dip. With European headlights, we must also consider the height of the centre of the headlight from the ground. If we go to the scale, then we have a blue scale and a red scale. So if I can set my tape measure to 850 millimetres, which is approximately there, we can see that this headlight is below, so I'm going to use the red scale. If it was above, I'd then use the blue scale. So, John, can you put your headlights on, please? Make sure they're on dip. Looking at our screen, we can then clearly identify the parts of the image that we must consider being too high and too low. You'll notice a 0 horizontal line and a 0 vertical line. To the right of that is a scale. We're going to use the red scale. Using the band that comes across, we then make sure it's in the red, and this one clearly is. The other part of the image we use is the break point, and that's just as the image starts to kick up. We use that as the break point, and we make sure that's between the 0 vertical line and the 2% vertical line. And again, this one clearly is, and therefore that one's a pass.
So that's all right.
That one's fine. What we now need to do is ensure, headlights off please, John. We then have to ensure that this headlight was also lined up. We must take time to line up the headlight aim tester.
Now, there's also an issue regarding complex lenses, isn't there?
Yes, those types of headlight, you'll find you have to bring the vehicle much closer to your headlight aim tester. Otherwise, you don't get an image. You just get this blurred mess. In bringing it forward, you should bring it forward sufficiently to get that clear image, and then you can apply the same assessment as we did for a European headlight.
Now, people who might drive their cars to Europe sometimes have the so-called beam bender fitted. How do you deal with that?
Yes. If you're using a left-hand drive vehicle in the UK, the chance I will have the headlights pointing in the wrong direction, and therefore you need to temporarily alter the kick-up to form a straight, level line in order still to apply the too high, too low pass-fail limit.
Now, this car has a height adjuster fitted. How should the tester approach that?
Yes, with vehicles with height adjusters, what the testers shouldn't do is they shouldn't touch it initially. They line up the headlight aim tester as we just demonstrated. If the headlamp image is too low, they should then move the height adjuster to the 0 position, which is usually its highest position, and then recheck the headlight aim.
But some cars have so-called British American lamps fitted.
You can get two types. You can get one that does the main beam, and you get the one that does the dip. When you're checking the main beam, then you get a hotspot image on your screen. You use the centre of that hotspot image to then say whether it's too high, too low, too far to the left, too far to the right.
The centre of the hotspot must not be above the horizontal 0 line. Also, it must not be below either the lower red or blue lines, depending on whether the headlamp is more or less than 850 millimetres above the ground. The centre of the hotspot must not be to the right of the vertical 0 line or to the left of the vertical 2% line.
With the headlight, which you're going to test on dip, then you'll get another image. Again, we're going to use the hotspot for this, but it's going to be the right-hand edge of the hotspot to say whether it's too far left or right, and we use the upper edge of the hotspot to say whether it's too high or too low.
The upper edge of the hotspot must not be above the horizontal 0 line or below the horizontal 2.75% line. The right-hand edge of the hotspot must not be to the right of the vertical 0 line or to the left of the vertical 2% line.
We've covered an awful lot, Don, in this short film. I guess if people have missed something or they have doubts about a particular area, the manual's the best place to go to.
Yes, the tester should always refer to the manual.
Thank you, John. It's been enormous fun. Thank you for helping us lighten up.
You're welcome.
Here on Earth, ensuring good testing practices helps keep our roads safe. Looks like they could learn a thing or two from us on Planet Zog.
I'm in communication. I am in communication. I'm not in communication. Communicate if you receive my communication. No signal on my mobile communicator. No signal. No signal.
Don't forget, if you need further advice, the MOT hotline is on this number.